Ladies and gentlemen, mostly gentlemen, I think, but ladies also, please. I'm Steve Erlanger. I have the great privilege of doing this panel on the Middle East. We have a nice, tight panel, which is good. So what we're hoping to do is have a conversation. Everything's going to be a little bit shorter because of this long lunch. But before I start, I want to just say two things. One is to thank Thierry, Song Nim, and all the team for truly a substance-filled conference. I've been very impressed because there are a lot of conferences that aren't nearly as substantive. And second, if I'm allowed, I just want to make a nod to someone who used to come constantly to this conference. He was a great friend named Jim Lowenstein, who died at 95. He was an American ambassador. He founded the French-American Foundation. He was a tennis player into his 80s. He was very important in the criticism of the Vietnam War as a young Foreign Service officer. Charming man. I miss him terribly, and I just wanted to bring his name up. So onward to our real substance. I won't introduce these two gentlemen. I think everyone knows who they are. So I'm just going to start with you, Mr. Fahmy. Anwar Gargash was here. He gave a pretty good speech. He said October 7th was a geopolitical earthquake. And to me, October 7th was a bit like the fall of the wall in 1989. It was completely unexpected. It wasn't predicted. And it's been having ripples that are continuing. So what are the outlines of this earthquake? And do you think more ripples are to come?
Sure. First of all, thank you for the question. But before I get into that, I want to thank Thierry. I want to thank the WPC team for the invitation and all the hospitality. And I want to thank, of course, the Emeritus for their continuous hosting of this project. I agree. I actually think that it did have, October 7th and October 8th and thereafter, a geopolitical shakedown or earthquake. I don't think it was a surprise, though. The volume, if you want, the bloodshed, of course, was a surprise. But with 70 years of conflict, you've had recurrent outbreaks of violence. But to go to your point, before October 7th, we were all becoming complacent that this could continue with occupation and tension, security and insecurity, without there being damage. And more, people even started to lose sight of the very fact that the real solution to this is Israel living in security and peace in its borders, and the Palestinians living in security and peace in their borders. So the two-state solution before October 7th was something you and I talked about, but not the public.
And even you and I didn't talk about it much.
Yeah. With what happened on October 7th and after that, now everybody understands this cannot continue. There will be continuous bloodshed, recurrent. Nobody knows who will start it and where, unless we solve the problem. And that means doing two things at the same time, or at least linking them together. Dealing with the crisis, in other words, October 7th and the ramifications, the Gaza situation, and ultimately finding a way to lead that into the resolution of the conflict, which is Palestine-Israel, which has to be dealt with in itself, and which always has ramifications regionally on many other issues.
Right. So, Itamar, talk about that, but also build on what's happened in Syria. You've studied Syria for a long time. You've written books about it. This is one of the ripples. Maybe the ripples haven't stopped. What do you think?
Yeah. So, in 1965, Patrick Seal, the well-known British journalist and expert on Syria, wrote a classic called The Struggle for Syria, in which he argued that Syria became the playing ground of the Middle East after 1945, when it became independent. It was a very weak state, unstable. There were 3 coups d'etat in 1949 alone. And it turned out that behind each of these coups d'etat, there was either a regional power, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and so forth, or an international player, Britain or France. And Syria escaped from this mayhem by actually merging with Egypt into the United Arab Republic in 1958, which again failed, and so forth and so forth. And Syria only gained stability and strength as a state, or power as a state, under Hafez al-Assad, who ruled Syria for 30 years and had a Faustian deal with the Syrian public. I will give you stability. I will turn Syria into an important country in the region and sometimes internationally, but you will have to accept oppression, corruption, and a rule by a sectarian minority. That lasted 30 years. The son, Bashar, was not as capable of the father. He was a so-so president for 11 years, and then the civil war broke out, and the regime became rotten. So one of the explanations for what happened is that it was so rotten that it only took a push for the regime to fall. And I think what has happened now is that Syria, again, is the playground for domestic and external forces. You have, of course, the ruling or the dominant element in the coalition. You have the Kurds, you have the Alawites, you have the Druze, many actors into it. It's not clear where it is going domestically. And externally, Turkey, Israel, Arab countries, Russia is trying to salvage something. And the big question mark, the United States, because President-elect Trump said several times that we are not going to be part of this mess. He used unpleasant words about Syria. I think it's a big mistake, because if it's the playing ground for the region, and everything that happens or does not happen in Syria affects its 5 neighbors, the United States should be there and should participate in trying to create a stable situation in Syria. If it's not in the game, others will be in the game.
Yeah. I mean, the Americans also did a lot of bombing the other day of ISIS. I mean, just as the Israelis did a lot of bombing of chemical weapons and so on. So there's a lot of anxiety. Anwar Gargash spoke about it in this gentle way, but the possibility of a fragmented Syria where Turkey has a lot of influence, not in in its light political Islam. I mean, Turkey isn't the UAE. I mean, Turkey has a different notion. Turkey isn't Egypt, right? So I'm curious, before we get back to Israel-Palestine, what you both think about the role of Turkey, and is it containable, is it helpful, or does it create other problems for Arab nations, other Arab nations?
I personally don't support any material engagement from one state versus another across borders. And I mean in the negative sense, not in terms of support. And that applies, of course, to Turkey. It applies to the bombings that occurred in the Syrian territories and so on. But that being said, they will pursue their interest. And they will do that in a multifaceted way, some with which we'll agree, some with which we'll differ. My approach and my suggestions, even to my own colleagues, complain all you want. That's part of the game. But you have to be proactive to balance the playing field. And to Itamar's point, if you leave the playing field open, others will fill it. So my point to my Arab colleagues, including my own country, be out there in the playing field. Make your suggestions, engage the Turks, engage the Syrians, engage whoever's on the ground, because otherwise it will be a result of an interim balance of force. And the real concern now, and this is always on the mind of Egyptians, if we move away from the nation-state concept to non-state parties. It's very, very dangerous, and I don't want to take you back to Sykes-Picot, but that whole area has families and different sects across borders, and if you start pulling those strings, you never know what you're going to pull in other countries as well.
I think, let me spend a minute describing the four major camps in Middle Eastern politics. There was the Iranian resistance axis, there was the moderate Arab states, Sunni Arab states, and there was the Islamist bloc, basically supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood brand of political Islam, that's Qatar, Turkey, and Hamas. And fourth, the jihadi organizations, ISIS and so forth. So Turkey belongs to that group, and they were big supporters of Hamas, including hosting a Hamas office in Istanbul, from which some of the activities were conducted in the region. Now, Turkey, I think, has immediate interests, two major interests. Let's also remember, Turkey has in practice annexed 8% of Syria, a strip along the border. Number one, it wants to send back 3.5 million Syrian refugees, and number two, they want to decimate, if not eliminate, the Kurdish autonomy because they regard it as a danger to the Turkish state. But then they also have the interest of Iran's rival for regional hegemony. Now Iran is weakened, Turkey in its own eyes can play a bigger role, and therefore it plays two games in Syria, the immediate issues and then the quest for using the Syrian arena for enhancing its own regional position.
I'm not sure Arab states will be very happy about this, though. That's part of the question, right? Because, I mean, I think you're right, Nabil, when you say that this is, in a way, it's a defeat for what we've been through, which is Iran exercising lots of regional power through non-state actors, right? I mean, and so one has the prospect, even in Lebanon as well as in Syria, of rebuilding a kind of nation state. But do you think that, not just to stick with Turkey, but I mean, it'd be interesting to see if Turkey actually gives up the land that it occupies. It's also busily trying to attack the American-backed Kurds. So it's hardly quiet.
Definitely, and it's not going to be quiet. And that's why, and I'm not making this point theoretically, when practitioners like us, for example, particularly in my case, emphasize international law, emphasize sovereignty. If we were all chummy, then borders wouldn't make a difference. Right. But since we're not, ultimately there has to be a controlling order here. And whether they're artificial or not artificial, they've been around for 60, 70 years, so it's important to keep and respect for the borders. The Syrian regime imploded for many different reasons, but you can't have a situation and stability where you have 4 different states with formal states, with forces on your territory, and dozens of non-state parties. So yeah, if we don't go back to state order, you'll have all of these cross-boundary issues, and it won't be easy to get the Turks or others not to get engaged. And I would argue, actually, strategically, Turkish-Arab cooperation is much more important than the Idlib issue.
Right.
And I think that the Turks would come around on this, although they are, of course, for reasons you know, hypersensitive in terms of the Kurdish issue.
Right. Just, do you think, Itamar, that this helps the prospect of a more regional solution, including an Israeli-Palestinian rapprochement, or does that part of it still seem a distant idea?
Let's begin with the Israeli-Palestinian. I mean, this is a keystone. Without any movement, positive movement on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, the Saudis will not recognize Israel, And the whole Biden idea of building, call it a moderate coalition, will not materialize. Now, limited prospects that this Israeli government will do it, except for one issue that I will mention in a minute. But the war, if Israel ends the war now, who is in power in Gaza? I mean, Hamas. So one reason that Netanyahu doesn't want to end the war now is that he would not end it with a victory. But he only has himself to blame for not bringing the PA 6 months ago into Gaza. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, is the only actor that would actually fight Hamas. If you send European peacekeepers to Gaza, what happened in Somalia and in other places when the Italian withdrew after they lost 14 people would happen there. So it's essential that Israel would agree to have the PA in Gaza. If the PA comes to Gaza and does a good job, support for an Israeli-Palestinian progress in the West Bank would increase because Israelis would appreciate the role that the PA could conceivably play. Now, the Israeli position could be altered by Trump. Trump has the power to persuade Netanyahu to do things that he doesn't want to do. He has the power to do that. If he wishes to go that route, and I'm sure that he very much wants a Nobel Prize, and that's a very promising route for getting a Nobel. So I don't rule out the possibility that the change would come from the direction. So that's the Israeli-Palestinian. Second is a larger regional picture. So there are two prospects here. One is that there could also be an Iranian-American deal. I think there is a great deal of opposition to the regime in Iran itself. There is a lot of criticism. People ask, we are suffering economically, and you have wasted billions of dollars on in Lebanon and in other places, and it all came to naught. Maybe it's time to think, rethink the policies. Now, from Trump's point of view, he could choose either to try to scare or to force Iran into something, or to come to terms with Iran. It's another route to the Nobel. So that's
Right.
These are two roads to a new regional situation.
Yeah, I mean, the Iran thing's interesting because when I've been talking to the Europeans, and I mean, they're trying to talk to the Iranians who are very interested in trying for a deal through Pezeshkian, right? To hold Trump off from installing maximum pressure 2.0 the first day, right? Because if he does that, I think the Iranians won't want to play. And then by October, you'll have, if not before, you'll have snapback sanctions. So on top of maximum pressure 2.0, you'll have all the UN sanctions back again, which will really be an economic blow to Iran. So my sense is Iran is at least open to an early deal. I don't know if the Trump people are, but certainly the E3 are trying to create the space for that, because the proliferation issue is significant.
Yeah. Iran will have to offer two things. One is to replace the deal the JCPOA made with Obama with
that's gone.
a better deal. With a better deal, it has to not to move forward, maybe in some sense to move backward, and secondly, to end its role as a regional disruptor. These should be the two elements of the deal, and the United States could offer normalization, end of sanctions, not friendship, but
and a meeting between the Supreme Leader and our Supreme Leader.
Well, actually, to remind you that Trump, during his first term, was chasing after the Iranian foreign minister in the UN meeting.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Nabil, on the Israeli-Palestinian thing, do you see much hope coming out of this?
I think the shock has, again, made us all realize we actually need to deal with the issues.
Yeah.
And we have two issues, really, but they're connected. The crisis, Gaza, and the day after Gaza. In other words, October 7th onwards. And we have the conflict, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that has been going on for decades and decades. To solve the Gaza issue, the Hamas, in particular, is not going to agree to a complete hostage exchange. Complete. They may do something partial. And lose all control. Then to be, as has been announced, targeted nevertheless by Israelis wherever they go, wherever they don't go. So they're going to ask for interim measures that will ultimately break down out of differences or look for closure. The Israelis, understandably, are not going to agree to a complete ceasefire or withdrawal except if they get a complete hostage exchange and some sort of security arrangements that makes them more comfortable. And I'm being, frankly, quite generous here, that there isn't more behind this.
Yes.
So my point really is, and let me add to that, to provide both sides with what's necessary, you have to have the regional community and the international community supporting this. And we have been, as Itamar mentioned, we have been pressured to take in more Palestinians, which we rejected for political reasons. But we've also, frankly, been asked to go in and manage Gaza, which is a hilariously silly idea.
Even Sadat didn't want to do it.
I know. And the idea of us having to shoot at Palestinians and Israelis makes absolutely no sense. So again, let me just very quickly summarize my approach here. I actually believe we need to have the crisis and the conflict as bookends of the same project. And that the best way to do that is whatever ceasefire agreement is being negotiated, complete or interim, put that in a Security Council resolution almost identical to what the US proposed, 2735, I think it was, is the number. It's a US document. But then add to it, and the reason I choose this resolution is it talks about ceasefire, it talks about complete hostage exchange, but then it talks about the two-state solution. And I would add to that all of the content of the hostage exchange, but I would add to it also recognition of the Palestinian state under occupation. Therefore, both sides know where they're beginning and where the ultimate objective is. The problem is neither side, and I'm being, again, very generous here, neither side trusts the other. So we need to take action on the ground with vision towards the future, but create some teeth to that vision. I don't think that can be done quickly with the present situation, one, because the present Israeli government does not believe in a two-state solution, and they've done everything under the sun to push Palestinians out further. And secondly, the Palestinians together are so divided that they're weakening their own negotiating position. But let me close with here. It's because of that by codifying the goal that we're looking for two states and the measures taken on the Gaza issue and linking that to the ultimate result, we're buying time as confidence tries to develop. Now, is that easy? Am I optimistic? I'm not, for religious purposes, a betting man, but that's a good reason not to bet.
No, well, precisely. It's also hard for me to imagine after October 7th, Israel giving up security control over Gaza under any circumstances, certainly along the borders. But, we'll see. I wanted to bring up the West Bank. I've spent a lot of time in the West Bank since October 7th, around Jenin and Tulkarm and these places.
That's what I meant by two states, because for me, it's not Gaza. It's Gaza and West Bank.
Yeah, in a way, you almost need a three-state solution. I mean, because, and then we haven't talked, which I'd like to get to. I mean, there was a lot of talk about the renewed or renovated Palestinian Authority. And you said it may have to wait for a new Israeli government. A lot of people think it needs to wait for Abu Mazen to go. So, Itamar, I mean, talk a bit about how you see the Palestinian Authority. Is it reforming? Can it do this role? Or does it just need to be a kind of figurehead?
Clearly, they need a new leadership. Personally, Abu Mazen is very old. At some point, in this or that way, he would have to be replaced. Secondly, the government is corrupt and inefficient. The government of the Palestinian Authority, it needs to be overhauled. I'm not sure that they're ready for statehood right now. The point, I mean, to have a failed Palestinian state, I mean, to create, let's say, by fiat, to create a state and then to have it fail after a year would be very counterproductive. So I think we need to look, let's say, at a 3 to 5 year period to say, we bring the PA to Gaza and we begin negotiations with the Palestinians with the prospect of a two-state solution, and we move gradually. During this period, the Palestinian Authority could overhaul itself with Arab help. In our host country here, there are several important Palestinians who are active in Palestinian politics and are supported by the government, and so is the case with other Arab countries, with European and American support. So we need to look at this 3 to 5 year period as a period in which gradually we'll move forward.
Nabil?
Just very quickly, I mean, people will assume I want to say something different. It's the exact opposite. I just wanted to confirm that what Itamar is saying is exactly what I meant. We deal with the crisis and project the statehood 3 to 5 years down the road. But thank you.
No, because, I mean, I must say, the economic disaster in the West Bank is quite severe. And there's a war in the West Bank. It's not like nothing's happening. It's a second front. And in the meantime, you know, under this current government with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, the settlement activity is proceeding, often with, I would say the indifference of the Israeli forces. I don't think they're actively helping much, but what they are doing is they're at war with Palestinian militancy and have killed an awful lot of Palestinians, have bombed West Bank cities, right? So for the PA even to get involved takes a bit of a leap of courage, because one of my friends in the West Bank who teaches at Bir Zayt said to me, one of the loneliest things in the world today is to be a moderate Palestinian. So how do we, nobody knows, but I mean, this takes time, but how do you manage the settler problem? I mean, can you have, at this point, even a viable Palestinian contiguous state? You know the cliche, but is it still possible? I want to ask both of you.
I don't think Israel should be mentioning names of Palestinian leaders it would like to see, because it would delegitimize them, but
could be a death sentence.
There was an excellent prime minister in the Palestinian Authority called Salam Fayyad, who began to build a state bottom up. And what he and other Palestinians like him that I've been speaking to said, we've had this conflict for many years. You seem to have won, and we looked at you and we drew a few lessons from what you did. And what you did under the British mandate is you built an embryonic state, and when independence came, you had a state, and we need to do the same. So, and Salam Fayyad is not alone with that outlook and with these capabilities. These people need to be identified not by Israel, and need to be brought to replace the current leadership of the Palestinian Authority, and this could make a huge difference.
I think that's an important point, but let me add something, and I say this regretfully. We cannot do it alone. In other words, Middle Easterners will not succeed in doing this alone for a multitude of reasons. We need international support as well as international leadership, not to do it for us, but to provide, if you want, the support and the pressure to continue. Just last couple of weeks or so, the Israeli Minister of Finance has openly said that he wanted the Israeli Jewish state to include parts of Egypt,
Right.
parts of Iraq,
Right.
parts of Syria, parts of Lebanon, parts of Saudi, and I think I missed out on the six. Furthermore,
Parts of Florida too, maybe.
he also said, day before yesterday, that Palestinians have three options. Leave, live in Israel without political rights, or face, if they're going to resist, the consequences of Gaza. This cannot be what the world accepts.
No.
I support a two-state solution. We started the peace process, and we want peace with Israel, with all the Arab countries. But to bring these pieces together with Salem or with others, we need serious international support. Trump is an interesting character. I don't know what he's going to do, but he's interesting in that he likes deals.
Yeah.
My problem is he likes deals in the business sense, not about right and wrong, but about who's rich and who's poor,
Yeah.
or who makes the benefit. So his essence is not historic rights or rule of law. It is how do you bridge the gap. And I'm concerned, frankly, and again, just yesterday there was a decision to, I think, renounce the administrative law in West Bank by the Israelis. But anyway, my concern is that the present Israeli government, and I'm using the term government because I know Israelis, other Israelis who want peace, will push to him that, let's be realistic here, you can't get a two-state solution. So let's actually go back to an interim situation where you get a ceasefire and claim it as the largest and the best
Right.
in the world,
Yeah.
and change the realities on the ground so they are irrevocable.
Yeah, well, this is why I asked the question, because, to some degree, Trump wants to end Biden's wars. I'm not sure he cares whose interests are sacrificed in order to get there. And then you have Huckabee who doesn't think Palestinians exist. What worries me is Trump giving kind of leeway for an annexation of another part of the West Bank, like the Jordan Valley, for instance. So
Could I just add 5 seconds to this?
No, go ahead.
And I won't interrupt you. I am concerned that the next step will be the Jordanian option. Push the Palestinians towards Jordan, sacrifice Jordan in sake of the Palestinian state, and that way it may appear to be feasible, and it's a very dangerous approach. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. Let's go back. Remember, there is the Abraham Accords, but there was also the deal of the century, the plan put together by Trump's team. It was a bad plan, but it included two very important elements. One is two states. True, 30% of the West Bank would have been lost to the Palestinians, but two states. And secondly, swap. The idea of swap was in that plan. So you could work to improve that plan. Secondly, you should notice that some of the without naming names, some of the people who were active in the first Trump administration on the Middle East are not there the second time. So he learned some lessons. Number 3, he said, I want the problem in Gaza resolved before I come in, because he doesn't want to waste his effort on a minor issue. I think he wants to spend the effort on a bigger issue. That's my sense.
Yeah. Well, we've been truncated, so unfortunately I'm not going to go to questions. I'm just going to keep going with another question about Trump and Iran and Israel. I mean, is there a risk that Mr. Netanyahu, with the wind in his sails, which he thinks, I mean, having with his army done some pretty amazing things, some pretty awful things too, I should say, does he go after Iran when Iran is vulnerable, as some on the American right and the Israeli right want him to do? Is there a risk just he presses his luck too far? And would Trump let him do it? I mean, I don't think the Americans are going to go in with him because Trump doesn't want to do that. But so I wanted to ask Itamar, I'll start with you.
I very much hope that he does not. I mean, because Netanyahu was at a very low ebb on October 8th, and he then managed to turn the tide, the big achievements in Lebanon, the decimation of Iranian power. He thinks that the fall of Assad, everybody thinks, is a great blow to Iran, and Israel is one of the beneficiaries. I think he's been overly active in Syria itself. I think Israel has done too much in the last few days. And I very much hope that he doesn't feel that, given the fact that Iran has no air defenses now, and given the fact that Israel alone cannot destroy the Iranian nuclear program, it can degrade it, it cannot destroy it, that he would not be tempted to do it. I will not vouch that he won't do it. I can only hope that he does not.
Yeah, I do have a comment. I mean, of course, Itamar is better versed to answer this because he's an Israeli, but from the other side of the table, from following the Israeli prime minister, he thrives on tension. Now, definitely, Trump will not want active warfare in Gaza and the West Bank. It's embarrassing even for supporters of Israel. Assad is not there, so although Assad was not a threat to Israel in the last 30 years, he hasn't actually used a gun across the border. And he was disagreeing with Iran more and more the last 6 months. So the natural target will be Iran. Now, then you have a problem, because if he chooses Iran too literally, it goes against Trump's inclination not to use force or not to engage. And if he does it, America will be in a very difficult position not to support Israel.
Sure.
So I would argue that you're going to see immediately a double order of pressure on Iran, with the hope that this preempts use of force and leads to a wider understanding between Iran and America, Iran and the region. And let me just make one point, and it's wishful thinking. When the GCPOA was first negotiated, I went to John Kerry, I was foreign minister at the time. I said, John, I'm a disarmament person, so this goes right into my portfolio. But you're leaving regional politics out of this package, and it doesn't make sense, even for us as Arabs. And his answer was, we couldn't do all of that at the same time. Well, that was a mistake. At least you should have done something in parallel with that. But I do believe that Trump will be open to the idea of a grand compromise with Iran, or a grand package. I don't think he will succeed in doing it, however.
Yeah. Well, we've unfortunately run out of time, but unfortunately also this is a story that keeps on giving. So I want to thank you both for engaging, and thank you for your patience. So thank you.